What are some of the key doctrines that are taught in the Bible?
I want to get right down to this thing that people have said, you know, with the Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi finds, and all of these new little books that have come down, that these books have changed the way we believe, okay? These were the gospel that's been preached for 1900 years, okay? That's one version of Christianity. Now we realize there were other books in circulation and other ideas about Jesus, and they're saying they were just as acceptable in the sense that they were there. So how did this specific train of orthodoxy come all the way down to us? They're saying, well, there was a power play around the 4th century with the creeds, and the church imposed this and threw out all the other stuff, okay? You're saying that's not true, and you're telling us the reasons why, and you're saying one of the ways that you examine these documents is to find out, okay, you do have documents at certain times, 2nd, 3rd century, talking about Jesus, using the apostles' names, all kinds of stuff. They're not connected with the apostles, but they also aren't connected in terms of the message, the theology that's been apparent in the early church right from the get-go. The theology is completely different. And you're trying to tell us today what's the core theology that the Bible's presented from the get-go. Then you can compare it with these others. And when the Christians did it in the early days, they said, that's not what we believe, and they discarded those books, okay? So tell us what's going on here.
Well, what we have is a core theology that passes through 2 centuries of conversation. I need to set the stage a little bit for what we're doing. Many of the university models will say that Irenaeus is the father of orthodoxy, that really the concept of establishing a canon and of pushing the idea of an orthodoxy and pushing others aside is a product that begins to emerge at the end of the 2nd century and then works itself out into the 4th century.
So about 180 Irenaeus.
About 180 in Irenaeus. And what I did years ago was to sit down and go through the doctrine of God, the doctrine of Jesus, and the doctrine of salvation, and go through and trace the writings before we get to Irenaeus, the so-called architect of this orthodoxy, and trace and see if there was a core theology that was consistently running through them. And I made the argument then that there was a core theology, and I think the best thing to do is to just read it.
Let's put it up on the screen for folks.
And the reason I'm going to do this is because when you hear it, it's not going to sound like a creed on the one hand. It doesn't sound like the Bible versus New Testament on the other, but it is dealing with the themes that the New Testament is presenting. Here I think is the summary. There was one Creator God. Jesus was both human and divine. He truly suffered and was raised bodily. He is worthy to receive worship. Salvation was about liberation from hostile forces, but it also was about sin and forgiveness, the need to fix a flaw in humanity that made each person culpable before the Creator. This salvation was the realization of promises that God made to the world and to Israel through Israel's law and prophets. The one person, Jesus Christ, brought this salvation, not only by revealing the way to God and making reconciliation, but by providing for that way through His death for sin. Resurrection into a new exalted spiritual life involves salvation of the entire person, spirit, soul, and very importantly, body. Faith in this work of God through Jesus saves and brings a spiritual life that will never end. That was the orthodoxy of the earliest tradition. And that's what this tour showed. It meant that there were certain things that were ruled out from the get-go in terms of orthodoxy. God was not to be divided in such a way that He was not the Creator. He was the Creator of all things, and that initial creation was good. A division between Jesus and the Christ in terms of His basic person and work was not acceptable. Orthodoxy was that Jesus, as Son of God, was sent from God and came truly in the flesh and truly suffered. And third, redemption only on the spiritual plane was not the true faith. Salvation included a physical dimension of resurrection and extended into the material creation. And this meant, fourth, that Jesus came not only to point the way to faith, to be a prophet, to be a teacher of religious wisdom, or to be an example of religious faith. Rather, His work provided the means to salvation. He was far more than a prophet. He was worshiped and affirmed, sharing glory with God as His Son. That is the core theology of the first 2 centuries, and you can pick virtually any substantial work of the first 2 centuries coming out of Christianity, out of this wing of Christianity, if you take it from the skeptical side, and you will hear and see that story.
Yeah, so if you're saying before Irenaeus at 180, you're looking at documents going back. You're saying you've got Jesus, you got him recorded in the Gospels, you've got the letters of Paul that are even earlier than the Gospels. Then you got the disciples of the apostles, the guys that sat underneath the teaching when Peter would preach or Paul would preach or John would preach. You've got those guys, their writings.
The speeches recorded in Acts.
The speeches in Acts. So you've got these things, and whether you look at what we call the 27 books of the New Testament, or whether you look at the writings of the apostles, disciples, or you look at the fathers that came after that, right from the get-go, you find all of that which you just said.
That's right. And the real key point here is that there's a consistency theology running through all these sources. It's running over 2 centuries. You can see it again and again and again. It's expressed with some variety of terminology and with some variety of emphasis, but that core story is what is being told and is what is being passed on. You'll notice it's not quite the language of the creeds, because the creeds are going to develop what is here, and it's not quite the language necessarily of individual passages of the New Testament, because what we're seeing is the synthesis of what those texts are doing out of the New Testament and the way they were conceiving kind of the whole big picture story.